Shall we start off with just very quick introductions, just so that people know who we are? I'm Jack Gavigan, Executive Director of the Zcash Foundation.
Andrew Miller, Board Member of Zcash Foundation.
Ian Sackstetter, Community and Marketing Espresso Systems and Zcash Community Member.
Jason McGee. I'm on ZCG and also recently started a Swiss-based organization called Shield Labs.
Jonathan Rouache. I'm CEO and co-founder of Kedit and also work at zkproof.org standardization.
Josh Swihart. Today, I'm the Senior Vice President of Growth for the Electric Coin Company. In 2 days, I won't be. I'll be a community member.
I'm Zuko, and I'm wearing my ECC hat, I guess.
All right, we'll get started with questions. So we're going to start by going right into the Dev Fund. That's, I think, the big topic for us to discuss. This is scheduled to end late next year, so this is now decision-making time on what, if any, to do for a Dev Fund in the future. So by way of a short intro question to us, I'd like to hear whether you think the Zcash community should renew the Dev Fund or replace it with something different. If so, what would you change and why? Well, you go first, Jack.
Obviously, in representing the Zcash Foundation, I have a clear and obvious conflict in that the Zcash Foundation's sole source of funding at the moment is the Dev Fund. With that said, I'd like to think that the results that we've achieved using that funding speak for themselves, and I would hope that the Zcash community agrees and would decide to extend our funding by something like, if not similar to, the Dev Fund. So the short answer is yes.
I'll give my short opinion on it, too. I'm in favor of continuing the Dev Fund. I think it's been a constructive and unique and overall successful thing in the Zcash community. I actually think I like the structure of it as well. So actually the only change that I would prefer to make is to slightly expand the ZCG's slice, just for the reason to honor, I think, them exceeding the expectations of what ZCGs should do. Yeah?
I think we should extend the Dev Fund with some changes. I think one of those changes could be adding some more jurisdictional resilience. I think also we don't necessarily need to allocate Dev Fund slices to these new programs, but I think we should implement programs that onboard more community contributors and make it easy, make the barrier to entry to like contributing to Zcash lower, and allow people to access the block reward directly and earn it. And then lastly, I think we should renew it because I think it's an interesting funding model that should be experimented with. And if you don't like it, you can opt out by selling your Zcash for something like Monero. So let's see how all these funding models play out and which one wins.
There's always Z Classic.
Yeah, Zcash.
Z Classic is Zcash without the Dev Fund.
Or Ycash.
Ycash.
Ycash, yeah.
And yeah, Ycash is Zcash with the Dev Fund stretched out over all time. So it does have a Dev Fund, but it's
Well, it has the founder's reward. Yeah.
It has
Oh, yeah. Right.
Jason?
I support continuing the Dev Fund. I'd like to see some changes made. I'd like to see it further decentralized to include 1 or 2 more entities. I would support ZCG continuing to receive the largest slice of the Dev Fund. I echo what Andrew says about the importance of it. It proved itself over the past couple of years, and it should continue to bring new entities in to help further decentralize Zcash, so we can get another Kedit and other similar organizations. I would like to see some changes in governance, relatively modest changes. Primarily, I think community governance is very concentrated with the Zcash Foundation, so I'd like to see that reduced a bit and maybe, sort of have the community play a bigger role in that process.
I guess at this stage it's 4 and there's 3 remaining, and I'm also in favor as a recipient of a grant that has helped us come and contribute to this space. So, yielding.
So a couple disclaimers. One disclaimer, I'm going to speak on behalf of myself and not for ECC, if that's okay. Good? Okay. Second disclaimer, I got off an airplane about an hour ago after about 40 hours of delays and rerouting. So hopefully I can speak coherently, but there's no guarantees. So I actually proposed something different in the forum. I do believe in the dev fund. As Zuko says, I think it's a superpower of the Zcash community to be able to fund ongoing development of the protocol, of the work that we're doing. We've seen the impact in other places, both with kind of development petering out, as well as the kind of capture of some chains where the economics are a little bit different. One of the things that's been amazing with this dev fund over the last 4 years is just this community. This community is like radically changing. So the first kind of Zcons that I went to, amazing also, but a lot of science, a lot of cryptography, a lot of that kind of thing. And the dev fund, I think, opened us up to a much broader group of people willing to contribute and be out there and advocating for the technology and doing things that kind of align with their own skill sets. And so it's been more inclusive, which has been super awesome. The challenge that I have with the dev fund is that it's directly goes to the wallets of two organizations, and one disperses it out to grants. So I'd like to see a governance change that allows for an independent entity to be able to allocate funds based upon the outcomes that those organizations receive, and not just assume that those organizations are going to receive the money for the whatever period of time.
Like I just said in my talk, I think the dev fund is Zcash's superpower because of sustainability and resilience. Aside from what I just said about resilience being measured by independence and everything being trade-offs, I don't have a lot to add, except I remembered something. I was going to put it in my talk, but I forgot to say it. There's this concept called the direct grant option that's built into the current dev fund. And the idea was, if Zcash Community Grants decides they could allocate a slice of the dev fund to one of their grant recipients instead of paying the grant recipient through them. It hasn't been exercised yet, but I really like it because it shows how like that question after my talk, like how much work or how much, what would that take or how long would it take? It would be much simpler than the changing the consensus rules to cut a dev fund recipient out. If the Zcash Community Grants Committee decided to exercise the direct grant option, I think it would be really straightforward for all of the users to upgrade to the software that added that grant recipient as a new direct recipient. And I think that's really interesting because they would, that grant recipient's funding would then bypass not only ZCG and ZF, but it would also bypass the entire US government with that simple option. So I guess the point is dev funds are more upgradable and mutable than people have chosen to take advantage of so far.
Yeah, the direct grant option, has been discussed a few times, but there's never been a formal application or suggestion that it be used. I think the only limiting factor there would be the end of support life cycle of the various node software implementations. And it's also worth probably, that direct grant option was also very much in line with what the original purpose of what was then called major grants, is now called Zcash Community Grants, was, which was to bootstrap and get some momentum behind the next Zcash Foundation, the next ECC, so that there could be multiple organizations all capable of operating independently and autonomously, receiving direct funding from the dev fund and not reliant on a single committee or a single group of people for their funding.
So I'd suggest maybe don't think about the next dev fund as something that you're going to design and set up, you as the community are going to design and set up, and it's going to be more perfect than the previous one, and then it's going to be like set in stone for 4 years. Maybe think of it as something more mutable.
There's no reason why the dev fund can't be changed on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment with regard to the direct grant option. So one of the reasons why we haven't pulled the trigger on that is because, like Kedit, for example, is the ideal candidate for a recipient of direct funding. But the problem is at a low value of ZEC, like you have to give away such a huge slice of ZCG's allocation of the dev fund that it would just completely, impact our treasury. And that's before the next halving occurs, so it's...
Or alternatively, you're asking organizations such as Kedit to be long ZEC for a long period of time, and that affects how we can plan for hiring and just function as an engineering group. And this is, I guess lessons learned from the past. When you can and have the ability to plan and attract really good talent, you do it. I think that there's a case for the support part of the features we're building, where this is over a long period of time and can be somewhat adjusted to to what the rate ends up being, where that could be an interesting option.
Are you saying, Daniel, that sorry, Josh, that I'm sorry, Jonathan, that you would prefer the consequence of a direct option as opposed to the periodic disbursement from ZCG makes a difference in that regard?
I'm saying, I'm reacting to, those conversations were extremely pragmatical. They took in consideration the exact rate at which we were talking about, and
the rate, like the price at
the current price of ZEC on the market when those conversations happened, and very pragmatically, you don't want to end up, dedicating according to that current rate too much of that fund, but I'm very hopeful that all these efforts are going to bear fruit, and people, as they use more, this actually, contributes to grow the ecosystem, and we can find areas of sustainability in a year or two where those options of being long ZEC for a long period of time to fund ongoing support for the features we've built, this makes sense.
So you're saying that you would accept a lower USD equivalent if it meant you had some skin in the game, receiving ZEC directly?
This is, so we've been, followers of what's going on in Zcash for a really long time, and I think there's a bit of a discrepancy between what was achieved with this project to where it currently sits, economically, and I'm bullish on what we can achieve once we add more functionality. I can't bet that position with salaries and the core functioning of engineering, but there's certainly a portion where you can dedicate that's tied to what's going on in ZEC.
Yeah.
I have as a next planned question to go a little bit into high concept a bit, and then we'll come back to kind of concrete and specifics and back to decentralization a little bit. For now, the plan for the next question is about the social contract within Zcash. So the context for this is to recall back many, many Zcons ago, at the end of the founder's reward period, had to decide to make a dev fund in the first place after that. And the main countervailing narrative at the time was that the expectation was that after the founder's reward period ended, that thereafter all new issuance of Zcash in every block would only go to miners, and there wouldn't be anything else, issuing except going to miners. And the, question and counter narrative that arose then is that, this is violating a social contract about the network as a whole, or a social contract, from everyone else towards the miners. that was that discussion at the time. Broadly, the question is about, what are the social contracts that are, within Zcash? And this can be an answer that's not necessarily binary. You can have things that, perhaps should be hardest to change or least likely to change, like bedrock principles of our social contract. Other aspects that are more likely to be, parameters to tune, maybe can be changed more easily or through a lighter weight governance process. So the question here is, well, first of all, do you think that the, economic nature of Zcash issuance is part of the social contract? And, what other, if any, aspects are part of Zcash's social contract, versus which one, especially in terms of which ones should be encouraged to change versus which ones should be hard or impossible to change at all? Yeah, you go first, Jack.
It's a tricky one because, on the one hand, anybody can just fork Zcash and do whatever they want to do with it, set whatever consensus rules they want. On the other hand, if there is an expectation and people, get involved in Zcash in the expectation that there's going to be a certain set of outcomes in the long term, then just changing the rules, even if it's done in a way that that respects the will of the entirety of the Zcash community, there are always going to be some people, some individuals, implicitly a minority, who oppose such changes. So I think it has to be done. It has to be done carefully. At the same time, I think one of the things that Bitcoin has struggled with is a certain failure to progress. And I think that had Bitcoin been prepared to be more innovative and to change some of its fundamental protocol consensus rules, then it could well be that projects like Ethereum may not, or indeed Zcash may not have been able to gain traction. For me, I think that the supply limit cap of 21 million coins is something that is immutable, or should be immutable. I personally would be very, very disappointed if that cap were ever lifted. I think that that's something that's really important to be very careful with. Whether a certain expected proportion of funds should go to miners, or how the funds how newly issued coins get distributed, I think is a question for what's best for Zcash and how we can best deliver on Zcash's mission. And fundamentally, the mining reward is paying miners to secure the Zcash blockchain. There's clearly broad support for moving away from pure proof of work because of the the environmental impact that it has. So, that's clearly up for debate, up for change. And if that is up for change, then we need to make sure that whatever replaces it is economical in the sense that we're not overpaying for the security that we get, whether it's through proof of stake or a different type of consensus forming mechanism. So for me, it's really the supply cap that I think is I think that would be a significant and groundbreaking change.
For me personally, I'll do mine quickly, but I just want to say that my favorite thing about the Zcash community is that all of the drama, controversies, discussions, we're never having internal debates about whether to weaken the privacy guarantees. I think being strong privacy activist hardliners is the #1 bedrock principle of Zcash, and I'm delighted that that's continues unchanged. I do think that the 21 million issuance limit is the only other, bedrock principle, and besides that, I think our mission to, remain and improve decentralization is the strongest principle. And I think beyond that, everything else is subject to change, and also that miners are working to serve the protocol and not the other way around. Ian?
So, I think when you kind of opt into Zcash, there's this narrative right now that you're buying it and then potentially not relying, but there's this subliminal reliance on ECC and ZF to forward the protocol and build things and make things happen, ZCG included, sorry. I think that social contract is really interesting because I feel like that might be one of the reasons that people in the community necessarily sometimes don't feel like they have a voice. It's because they don't feel like even if they raise issues or are able to ask like really hard questions that they're going to be effectively listened to. So I'm curious in the way that we can like engage with the community and create different signaling mechanisms. And I'm not saying the ones that we have right now are bad. Like I think Zcap's very good. I participate in Zcap. I take it seriously. I imagine others do as well. But can we create more models like that to kind of signal more social consensus around the things we're doing? I think by the decentralization aspect that you guys talked about, like the 21 million supply cap, we have to figure out a way to like essentially pay for that. Like how do we drive a fee market within Zcash that is able to like sustain a network long term and not have to remove that cap and introduce something like tail emissions? So I think by this decentralization thing that we're talking about right now, we'll be able to like create new social contracts that can ensure that we're like building more products, advancing the protocol in a way, adding more functionality that can sustain the things that you guys just mentioned. So I guess, yeah, not different, but more community signaling mechanisms, easier path to contribution, and having a more decentralized community so people can find their own pockets within that.
I think the things we don't compromise on are commitment to decentralization, the 21 million supply cap that's immutable, as Jack said, and the commitment to the best privacy-preserving technology. I thought somebody might be alluding to possibly increasing the dev fund to exceed the 20%. I don't know if Jack was alluding to that, but it's not something that I think it should stay at 20%, but I think people should sort of explore the possibility of doing that if they think that there's if they support that. Josh, you mentioned, somebody should do a study to figure out exactly how much it costs to secure the network, and I think for those who support that, that seems like a logical next step.
So I'm going to actually double click on those security pieces and the technology itself. I think people are assuming that the engineers are doing their best to bring the best privacy, as you said, and make sure not to rush things out and have strong assurances that all those issuance of tokens that happen, privately, and all the sophisticated systems that are in place to give you this privacy continue to work and don't break. This is underlying everything. If there was a breach of trust between the community and the outcome of the engineering work, then we wouldn't even be talking about any of this. It's just a tremendous success that this very complex system is actually running and upgrading and moving from one set of primitives to another, and so I think people trust these groups to do a really good work there, and I see the support of Zcash in the other hat in zkproof.org standardization. There's actually work to show how it's done in Zcash to benefit other users of zero knowledge in general. This is something that I think is expected and continuously delivered.
I'm having a hard time with it just because I'm trying to think of all these different examples. When you talk about privacy, right? And we know privacy is not perfect anywhere. We know Zcash is not perfect with privacy. We have network level security or network level privacy issues today. Maybe that gets fixed, but it's a continuum. We're never going to get to the perfect privacy. So to say advocating for privacy is a norm, and it's a thing that we're pushing for, and it's part of this thing in terms of this goal for economic freedom for everybody, because we know it's a necessary thing. How does that relate to social consensus? I don't know, the 21 million. I believe that too. I believe it's sacrosanct. You should change it. But who gets to say? I mean, we've said decentralization, and maybe decentralization is the common thing as it relates to social consensus, that we're pushing for greater decentralization. But ultimately, it's up to, if that's true, it's ultimately up to the community to determine, like, what are the norms. So, and maybe there's a distinction between like social consensus, which I think is kind of a, I don't know, like maybe there's norms, and those are the norms that we kind of all move towards, and some people have stronger feelings and some people have less stronger feelings, but we've kind of got a common thing that we're going towards. But for me, this hard question, it's a hard question. It's not binary of what these things are or are not. Maybe other than, the decentralization.
I mean, if it helps the framing, maybe you could interpret the question as what's your view of, not just your personal view of what you want for Zcash, but what's your perception of what the community as a whole considers the most strongly held principles? Maybe that doesn't help.
Yeah, and I kept saying social consensus, social contract. It's, we talk about privacy, and I think a lot of us, or most of us, or all of us, are big advocates for that. But again, some people will take that to the extreme and want to cover everything up, and they want to completely hide, and some of it's personal, and some of it's because they have to, because they've got a threat model that requires it, and that's why they believe in this thing, and they don't believe that it's like doing all the stuff they needed to do today, but they're guarding against, or they're hedging against a more dystopian future, and so they want to kind of participate. So that is an anchoring point. The 21 million in terms of this kind of libertarian ideal of how money should work. Does everybody in the room believe that the 21 million is sacrosanct? I don't know. Is that
a request for a call for hands? Raise your hand if you think that the 21 million limit in Zcash is important.
Yeah, so a lot of hands, but not every hand.
See 50-50.
Right?
I felt like half.
Raise your hand if you think it's not important.
Thank you.
1, 2.
I think that person raised their hand twice.
So, but the point is like
Sybil attack.
They don't believe in supply caps.
And we have a subset of the the broader community. So I mean, it would be great. I don't know if we have it documented anywhere. It'd be great if we had just even like a manifesto of the norms within the community, of the things that we as a community kind of ascribe to and generally believe, without it being necessarily a complete kind of social contract per se. But anyway, that's why I'm struggling with that one.
Go for it. Zuko.
When other people say privacy, I generally translate in my mind to users' consent, because a lot of users like to share with specific things with specific people, and I guess that's not privacy, because it's sharing, which is the opposite of privacy, but to me it's the same thing. 'Cause, like, the users getting control over their own sharing or not sharing is important, and that's a real bedrock principle for me. I personally would strongly object to making any of that sharing or not sharing subject to any third party's decision. If it's not the actual individual users involved, then I'm not for it, who get to control that. I think the 21 million cap is really important in the sense of, Andrew asked about the social contract, and I guess the way I translate that in my mind is, how likely do I think that the price of ZEC would fall if that were changed? That's how I translate the social contract. So I think if the limit on the total number of Zcash ever was raised from 21 million to 21.5 million, I think the price of Zcash would fall a lot. So therefore, I'm against it. But I think Bitcoin is probably demonstrating that the 21 million cap is unsustainable without some other method of recycling or inputting more value into the coin. Well, I guess we'll find out in another 10 years, but as far as it seems to me, maybe other people know better than I, but I don't think Bitcoin is sustainable because of that. And even though it has transaction fees, I still don't think it's sustainable. And the only two sources of funding that could sustain the network while respecting the 21 million Zcash cap are transaction fees and storage fees.
Can I ask a question about the consent piece?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it's in the social contract, and I'm giving like a hypothetical. In the user interface, the user sees that they have a request from law enforcement to share information. It's fully in their hands if they decide to share or not share. But as a protocol, we allowed a situation to happen where it's now known that the user was informed if they're going to be breaking the law or not, but still they keep the, the control of I'm allowed to share or not to share. They can't force me to reveal myself. Is that still within the social contract of current Zcash privacy?
In my opinion?
In your opinion.
That's a really good question. I'm really glad you brought that up, and you alluded to it in your talk this morning about the ecosystem, to the same kind of question about like law enforcement access. So I think my opinion, I have a technical thought and then I have an opinion. My opinion is that consent is super important to me. It's kind of like one of the most important concepts in my personal morality, but it's often complicated, right? It's often complicated. And in your example you're giving, it's complicated to me. Like I can't tell. Like I can imagine situations in which that violates my sense of morality and I'm very strongly against it. But the way you described it, it would not, because the user would be informed and would be electing freely to share their information with their country's law enforcement for their reasons. And so that is perfectly fine with my morality. But my
the delta is that as protocol builders, we allowed the information that law enforcement is seeking this consent, and we are participant in the fact that now that person, before they didn't know anything, and now this person is presented with, do you want to break the law or not? And that's a fully, it's a deviation from what's going on today in Zcash. Is this still in the realm of, in your opinion?
Yeah, so in my opinion, I might or might not hate that depending on some more context about the people. The thing about consent is that you are able to consent to the degree to which you have a good alternative, right? If someone is in distress or, their next best alternative is terrible, then I don't really think it's fair to say, oh, they signed on the dotted line that they were going to, become enslaved to me and it was consensual. Well, it wasn't really consensual if their alternative was even worse, right? So it really depends. But my technical thought is, I think the thing you're describing is mostly, you may know better than I, but I think it's mostly has nothing to do with the blockchain or the protocol. I think whether the user is informed and what their alternatives are and how consensual it is probably mostly determined by the apps and the user interfaces and their social setting and who's like pressuring them or supporting them in other ways.
Not to rabbit hole too much on this topic, but so when I got an airplane to come to Barcelona, and I was dead tired, right? I mean, it took me 30-some hours to get to Chicago from Denver. They had all the people lined up, and I'm right at the front of the line, and they say, we don't need your boarding pass, we just need your facial scan.
Oh.
And so when I do the facial scan, yes, I have the option to opt out. I think somebody posted that on the internet. I didn't want to try it because I was so flippin' tired, and I've got a mountain of people behind me that are so flippin' tired. I just wanted the easy choice to opt out. And are we making it easy for people to opt out? And the harder choice is to consent to reveal. Because we have all of these kind of circumstances so what did I do? I got my face scanned. Didn't smile in the camera, but I got my face scanned because I was tired.
Anyone else want to react on this? This is a really thought-provoking question on the nature of consent.
Well, actually, there's kind of a converse thing, which I realized nobody mentioned and which I forgot about, which is ensuring that Zcash remains permissionless. I don't think you should ever need to get permission from somebody to be able to own, send, receive Zcash, or to run a Zcash node. I think that's really, really important. Making sure that Zcash is permissionless is what ensures that it's censorship resistant. I think that feeds through into the underlying values of Zcash.
I would just add one more thing. Like, I think this idea of like different user interfaces that tell the user what action they're about to take, or that type of that thought. Like in the Bitcoin privacy space, you have like two main wallets that do coin joins, like a Bitcoin privacy technique, and one's integrated with like a chain analytics company, and the other is like completely on the other side of the aisle, like kind of like total anarchy. And you kind of see with these two different models and these two different applications which ones users prefer and where the users kind of direct to, right? So like if you want to build these things that tell the user like X, you're going to break the law. Well, there's another app that doesn't do that. Which ones do the users prefer? So like as long as the protocol remains permissionless, just let application developers do whatever they want, and the users will pick the apps they like the best. And that's a good way to kind of figure out what people think socially.
It might be an additional thing that, that is kind of a social contract, is that everybody assumes that in this community, people are using these facilities to not to perform crime, and there's a majority of use that is in that direction, and that the choices are taken having that as the back thought, and you could have, you know, other communities and other places where it's explicit that we explicitly don't care what you do, and even if you're bringing, you know, crime to the story, that's explicitly fine. So I don't know if that's controversial or not, but it seems to be the case that the community has a kind of center of assuming that the other people around are not here to use this, you know, in like a strongly, what most people would say is strongly criminal.
That's a really fascinating point. I've been thinking a little bit about this since Ian's talk a little bit earlier. You know, we've had these comments and narrative in the Zcash community about, I mean, a blockchain is open. You don't check someone's intent, what they're planning to do with it, whether it's crime or not, when they, you know, post a message on a bulletin board. The, you know, protocol can't look into the minds of people who are using it. But at like a community and social level, that's almost saying, you know, we can have a social contract that is applicable to users of a network that, you know, says you'll promote, you know, pro-social, healthy uses that benefit, you know, everyone, network as a whole, at least are, you know, not themselves immoral. That could be something that is expressed as a social contract that applies to users, even if it cannot be enforced technically at a protocol level.
The string would be as a cryptocurrency that, like, the same as OpenAI, as a, you could have a, you know, end up being too politically correct with your interfaces, but yeah, you could have some indication that it is the wish of the community itself that these tools are used for good.
Can I ask a related question related to social contract? So, is it a break of a social contract, again, whatever that means, that we support, there's broad support for transparent addresses, and where most, I'm going to take that back, where there are a lot of users who don't know that they're not getting privacy by downloading transparent Zec into their wallet. So if we go out, if our, related to consent, but if we go out and we communicate, we educate, that Zcash is this, and Zcash is all about privacy, and privacy is normal, and all that kind of stuff. And I go download an Atomic wallet, and I go to Coinbase, and I KYC into Coinbase, and I buy my Zec, and I download my Atomic wallet. Am I getting privacy? Some,
What
but
if you withdraw it to your wallet and you withdraw it to a transparent address and you don't know it's a transparent address versus a shielded address?
And I've had this, this happens all the time. You talk to users, this happens all the time. So I had one who was a Silicon Valley investor. Another person in the community wanted me to talk to this guy because he's a big Zcasher and he had bought all this Zcash and he's a huge fan. And he's talking to me on how much he loves the privacy and how important that is. And I asked him what wallet he was using. And it was Atomic Wallet. And he said, and I was like, do you know that this stuff is not shielded? Because he's talking about how cool shielded stuff. He had no idea. He's a Zec user. He got a wallet that he thought was cool where the interface worked. But because of all of the communication that we have out to the community, he believed that he was getting completely shielded Zec. So is that a break in a social contract?
That is a break, yeah. I would say so. Sorry.
All right, we'll move on to another question. I'll call on you in reverse order so you know not to take a break from thinking fast. This is back to the dev fund. This is with a retroactive, kind of retrospective look. So the question is, what do you think are the lessons that we've learned in practice from observing what's actually played out with the dev fund over the past 2.5 years it's been around? And you can connect that to the implications for what we should do for following dev funds, but it's the retrospective viewpoint. Zuko.
Retrospective. So the price of Zcash has gone down. And that's really painful when you're on the receiving end of the dev fund. The dev fund is connected to the price of Zec, right? It's denominated in the price of Zec. You could imagine some kind of alternative with a stable coin or something where your blockchain is paying someone in a fixed number of dollars or something. And so it's really painful when you're getting paid in Zec, and that's your only source of funding, and the price of Zec goes down. But from the perspective of the community and the dev fund structure, I think that's really good. I think everyone who's getting paid dev fund should live in fear of the price going down, and they should suffer just like the Zec holders suffer when the price goes down. So that's my main retrospective at the moment. My other thought is that ZCG's been doing a really great job the last year or so.
Josh?
Yeah. So I love all the grants, and as I mentioned before, I think it's done a kind of remarkable job of bringing in new participants. I think the incentives are all jacked. And so it's my non-ECC hat. And in mea culpa, I don't think ECC's delivered. I don't think we delivered on what we said we were going to deliver on. Kills me. It's reflected in the price of the coin. It's reflected in engineering delays. It's reflected in that we don't have some software out there that we said we were going to deliver. But we have this year or 4 years of funding that we get to go kind of play with. There's a mix of things like that ECC does, right? ECC has a really important support function within the community in supporting Zcash D, the stuff that we do with the core cryptography. All of that stuff needs to kind of continue. And then we have speculative things that we play with. And some of the mea culpa, we spread ourselves too thin. Coin price went up, we thought we had money, we could go try these different things. We had a lot of not only pressure, but interest to be able to promote Zcash around the world and do all the stuff that we wanted to be able to do. And the reality is that the volatility within the market, that those rugs get pulled. And then what happens, you have all of this kind of sunk cost, where you've built up a campaign, or you've built up relationships in a certain place, and the money goes away, and you can no longer do it, and you lose all of that. You lose the money, you lose the momentum. In ECC's case, what is the means of accountability? We say we can fork the coin. Well, that's really hard. It's really hard to yes, you can go fork the code, but to fork the community, to fork all the kind of interactions with all of the exchanges and the wallets, really hard, maybe impossible. And to get anything done as it relates to, and I've been recently a vocal against the trademark agreement. There's this thing in place where the two of the three primary recipients, and actually where all the money goes through, are owners of, or the foundation's the owner of it, of the trademark, and the ECC has certain rights. So that structure seems like, to Zuko, I walked in at the end of your thing, so I didn't get to hear your whole thing. But this idea that that we can simply kind of add new people into that ecosystem or make those changes, I think that's it sounds nice. And so that's why I think kind of moving forward, yes, it was like right for the last 4 years. It made sense, having kind of lived through that whole kind of thing with the community. There's this fundamental question of should there be a dev fund? And that, I think, big question was answered. But moving forward, I think we need a different structure that drives for accountability and drives for change and allows for more participation with more people without guaranteeing, and I know there's some challenges of not having guaranteed money for.
No, I connect to what you're saying.
But without guaranteeing too far, like no matter what, you're going to get this money, no matter what you do. If you don't deliver, if you deliver, great. And let's change the structure to drive better outcomes, because I think we're at that place now where we need to make that evolution in our governance and our funding.
We happen to be in a grant that most, or at least half, is milestone-based. The first grant was more than half is milestone-based, and the second one is about half. And this is really maybe a call for other groups that are considering should they, knock on the door of the Zcash community and see if they can contribute. This community has done with outside contributors what they haven't done with themselves. They put aside guaranteed dollar, money to make sure that the outside companies can continuously work, and if they get to the milestone, they get the amounts that were discussed, and it's denominated actually in dollars. So you have that mix of it's not all upfront, and you don't just get money trickling in. You need to deliver what you sign on, but you do have this going for you that those are guaranteed rates, because at the moment where the grant is approved, there's guarantees that you will have the money if you deliver. So this is very important for groups considering joining. This is it might, I don't know if it will continue to be the case in the future, but it's something that the community has done with outsiders that it hasn't done with themselves.
And your grants, sorry, but your grant is like really big, right? We have
very large.
And so your big grant allows you some additional runway, allows you to do the planning, allows you to.
The way that it's built is we know that we can go to developers and tell them, listen, we have the horizon. You can come here and there's competition in this space, right? So it allows that, but then a big part of it is upon delivery of the actual milestones. If they take longer, then that money takes longer. But the important piece here is that you know that you're basically at the moment of grant, you're promised a dollar denominated if you deliver.
Yeah, Jason?
I have a potentially spicy take.
Great. It's about time.
I think that the biggest lesson learned is that managing a treasury that is denominated in a volatile asset is close to impossible. And I think none of the orgs did a good job, hedging their portfolios. And for that reason, I think each of the orgs would benefit from having some sort of treasury or finance function in the future to, better hedge their positions.
In that sense, the fact that there was a grant number one that was high but with a high rate is kind of lucky. Yeah. For the ZSA. We secured that at the point where the ZEC was much higher. It's kind of random, but...
well, you're holding the ZEC, so yeah, you have... the other thing I want to say is, the Ethereum Foundation sold the top in 2017 and 2021, and I wish we would have done the same. And ZCG as well. I mean, we hedged a small amount when ZEC was at 100. We should have done much more, and we'd be in a much better position than we are now.
I think a big lesson we can look at, and again, context is important. I've not been here in the community as long as other people. But from what I've seen in like the last couple of years, is I think we sometimes discount like how even small contributions can move the needle in a very, very like powerful way. For example, there's a weekly newsletter that goes out all related to Zcash and kind of aligned ecosystems. It costs 0.5 Zec, so 2 Zec a month to have 4 newsletters go out, and it's consistent, it is not stopped, and it's like just past a milestone of 50 editions. It's run by a community member who I have no idea what their name is, I don't know where they live, but it's just some random person that makes a newsletter. Why was that the first potential like implementation of a community member taking on that function away from like ECC, ZF, and ZCG, like an individual person? So we can look at these little like things that are starting to pop up in the Discords and all like the community ambassador programs that have like some really positive like inertia and be like, let's invest more in that and let's scale that, versus trying to trust more professional looking organizations at times. I don't think we need to do that for everything. I'm not saying like make the entire system like complete anarchy. But what is one kind of like, what is taking up my day and what could I offload right now as an employee at ECCZF or a major grant recipient? Like what could a community take on? Could a community member take this on? And how can we fund them and make sure that they're incentivized to continue contributing? I think that's a big lesson because we're starting to see little models of that appear and they're really effective and they're really cool and people are being able to access the block reward directly. So I think that's a big lesson.
Are you suggesting one of two things? One could be that you were saying to watch what happens in the community, what the community shows it can be good at, and then amplify that through funding? Or are you saying to actively like try to carve out tasks that one of the existing orgs does and try to get a community member to do it?
Yeah, I think there's both models, right? I don't think everything should be paid for up front. Like I think there needs to be some form of like volunteer work in the community. Like you need to prove that what you're working on is valuable and have enough momentum behind it to justify allocating like some portion of the block reward. So that side is really interesting. Like, what are we seeing in the community? What's super effective? What's gaining energy? And can we potentially interest those parties in receiving a grant? The other side of it is like internally at ECC and ZF, like what are the things that you guys could like offload right now that you hate doing? And it's like, could we create like a bounty program to take on these tasks? And I think there's a third point here, that if you kind of do this more and more and get the hands of like newly issued Zcash into the hands of many people as possible, there's like this weird incentive model that potentially they would be like, oh, I want to go and fund things on Free to Z. I am much more likely to donate and fund things with my Zcash versus like the ETH I buy on Coinbase or something. Because I view it as like money I've earned and I don't really view it as like an investment per se because I've only earned Zcash. So like, I go into these Free to Z things and I might fund like an anonymous contributor who wants to contribute, who can't go through the dev fund right now because of KYC. So more issued coins through those things and then like more like, undistributed issuance, and then you could potentially have even a non-KYC element come into play.
Okay. Jack, on the retrospective?
I think that ZIP1014 should have been a lot more stringent in terms of setting the requirements on the dev fund recipients and should have had specific, independent, proactive measures in place to ensure that they were complied with. I think a lot of people talk about governance, and in my experience, very few of them have actually read the relevant documents. So I'd encourage everybody here to read ZIP1014, particularly the transparency and accountability requirements, and really read them. And look at them very carefully and think whether the organizations that have received the funding have fulfilled those requirements. There's an element of trust when you give somebody money. You're trusting, number one, in their competence, that they're going to be able to do the job that they claim they're going to be able to do for that money. And number two, that they're not going to simply steal it and run away or divert it into their own pocket without giving back the full value. And I think that we should be far more, whilst it's right to trust, I think we should be far more careful about verifying that the organizations and the entities and the people that control the funds that are distributed as part of ZIP1014 and any future dev fund are doing what they are supposed to be doing and are complying with the requirements that come attached with that funding. It's very easy for people to just take the money and go, oh, thanks, I'm going to take the money. Yeah, I promise I'll do all this. And then they don't do it. So we need to have that accountability. And we need to have clear, independent, and proactive, not just waiting for somebody to notice, but proactive evaluation, probably on a 6-monthly or a yearly basis, to check whether they are fulfilling their obligations, and a very, very clear definition of what should happen if they're not.
What do you think the reason is that the orgs don't fulfill their obligations underneath, all the obligations underneath the transparency and accountability section? Are they too burdensome, or is it something else?
I can't speak to it. I think that sometimes they're embarrassing.
Okay.
Or sometimes people think that because they're in that position, they can, for example, they've been elected onto ZCG, they can, they get to ignore then what Zcon4 says.
Well, I look at the ZF bylaws and it doesn't look like ZCG is responsible for any sort of accountability or transparency requirements. I was talking about something different, but.
Any other concrete example or want to elaborate, or that's clear enough?
No, just think, the community should ensure that they're well informed about what Zcash governance actually is. Because the community can come together and it can reach consensus around a future dev fund. It can decide that these are going to be the organizations that receive it, or these are going to be the structures, and these are going to be the requirements imposed upon those. But if you don't follow up afterwards, if you don't check to make sure that those requirements, those strictures are being adhered to, then there's no point in really doing it, in really coming up with those requirements in the first place.
Do you think it would be beneficial to have some sort of transparency and accountability board that had some sort of hard power to take action when
They could perhaps have
breach?
a 6-month slashing power to, halt
Yeah,
it
but
from
an
slice if
independent
not,
board, right? So
I
is
think-
that something you would support?
I think there's a risk in putting too much power in the place of a small group of people, and I think that such groups of people can be subject to capture. And I think we've seen that a few times in the crypto ecosystem. But I think there definitely needs to be some mechanism, an independent mechanism, not subject to being elected or being appointed or being voted on by the recipients of the dev fund, but actually, something like, an audit firm or a law firm to go, right, tick box, have you published this information that you're supposed to be publishing? Are you revealing all the information that you're supposed to be revealing? And maybe checking, why is there a black hole in your accounts where money isn't fully accounted for?
So it seems like you're making some accusations, but you're not being explicit about what those are. So can you give the...
I'm suggesting that the community pays attention to what they voted for last time around and evaluates whether the organizations who have been receiving those funds have fulfilled their obligations.
So, look, and I would propose it's even broader, the obligations that we make to the community in terms of what we commit that we're going to give, which is in line with the proposal I put out in the forum, which is that there's an independent entity that's able to sign off on payments to those organizations based upon their compliance with the obligations that they made or the promises they made to the community.
Well, the problem you have then is instead of decentralizing power amongst multiple organizations, you're centralizing power into a single entity.
Not if you use the ZIP process as governance, right? Because if you have a single entity with multiple participants, which may include dev fund participants, it's just a broader group. So it may include that law firm that you want to include. So maybe it's ECC and ZF and the law firm, or maybe it's some other makeup, but you also have a ZIP process that allows for a change. That if there's some capture or something like that, there's only so many dev funds that can accrue into that account that allows for payment distribution out to those different entities. But through the ZIP process, the community can come and say, no, this group is captured, they're acting badly, they're not actually working the best interest of the community, so we're going to change the makeup of that
Is that a
group.
theoretical thing? Because or should I grab my popcorn and there's going to be some action now?
React however you like.
If there was such a group in place, would that have been actioned any time in the past few years?
I don't know. I think if there is proactive review of such requirements, then they're far more likely to be adhered to.
Agreed.
This may be a smooth transition, and I'll give you this next question, but this is broadly, how should we further decentralize Zcash overall to reduce its reliance on just these two orgs, ECC and Zcash Foundation?
The obvious, answer is to add more organizations that are instrumental in helping Zcash grow and thrive. That's the really simple answer. There is this, obviously as exec director of the Zcash Foundation, I believe that I'm doing a good job. If I didn't feel I was doing a good job or wasn't capable of doing a good job, then I would quit. Or if I wasn't doing a good job, but still had the belief that I was doing a good job, then the board, led by Andrew, would fire me. So therefore, I think that with more money, the Zcash Foundation can do a better job. But for the good of Zcash, it's really, really important that we have more than just the Zcash Foundation and ECC leading the future of Zcash. So I think that we do need more organizations. The purpose of the major grants, Zcash Community Grants program, was to help bring those organizations along and to kind of foster the future of more organizations that would sit alongside ECC and ZF, and hopefully we're gonna get to the point where that really starts happening. But yeah, certainly I think we need more organizations, and also it's been mentioned before, geographical decentralization I think as well is important. That's why, as was mentioned earlier, we've set up that entity in the Cayman Islands.
Can I ask one follow-up question? Does that extend to the trademark agreement, or if not, do you create separate classes of dev fund recipients?
I think that's a separate discussion. I think funding and there's governance of funding, and there's governance of the protocol. And the trademark has two roles. The first role is that it allows us to protect both the Zcash community and the general public from scammers. I gave a few examples earlier. The second role that it plays is that by dint of the trademark agreement, both ECC and ZF must agree regarding any consensus upgrade to the Zcash blockchain. That's very powerful because two of two is an incredibly powerful requirement. N of n in any situation, it requires that there's clear consensus between those n participants. If you start putting it into a situation where there's just a simple majority, then that becomes a very, very political scenario.
But isn't it more decentralized?
Well, it depends on whether you're willing to go with the tyranny of the majority.
And a Venn is favoring safety over liveness. It would mean that Ven's very large. It may be very difficult to pull off any fork at all.
And I think I think we shouldn't underestimate the risk of creating structures that incentivize very, very and adversely, perversely political behavior. Horse trading, making introductions to people who provide funding for things or whatnot. There's the ability to control the direction of funds is quite powerful. Even if you can't direct them to yourself, the ability to direct them towards people or towards organizations, is it's a power, and as we know, power corrupts.
Maybe a comment about small contributions. I think now we're at a time where an individual or just like a tiny group can provide a lot of contribution. There's an acceleration in how fast you can code that happened in the past 6 months. So we should also have higher expectation when we consider who's going to participate and how we fund, higher expectation of outcome.
You're saying because every engineer has access to ChatGPT?
All of ChatGPT, Claude and Bard and all of these actually can impact how efficient just a tiny group of people can be. So detecting those 10x engineers that now become 100x and just pleading them to stop toying around with AI and helping out in this ecosystem can really boost progress. And I think the first blockchain ecosystems that will be really pushing towards that and saying, you have a home here to deploy your superpowers acquired in 2023. That's that's attractive to people that want to show the new acquired skill.
And just one thing I would say about the point you were making, Ian, about this community member who's emerged to create this newsletter. I think that's absolutely fantastic. Mm-hmm. I think it's absolutely great. I want to see more of it. I want to see more individuals and community members and small organizations who can later grow to become bigger organizations taking up that sort of mantle and doing things, because that's what true decentralization is.
Yeah, nothing's more decentralized than grassroots, unsolicited contributions from an unknown. Yeah. Starting to nod vigorously. So.
But as it relates to the protocol, that's decentralization of community. It's not decentralization of the protocol. Protocols, right now, it's a 2f2 multisig. To your point, Dodger, it's 2 powers. It's very powerful. As I've said, it's the ring of power. It's the thing that we had to cast out to the fire because you and Zuko get to decide what the community
now
should be in
you
that.
weren't here earlier, so you didn't realize that I'm in the mood today where I'm not willing to let people mislead the Zcash community. It's not up to me. It's up to the board of the Zcash Foundation, and that board is majority elected by the Zcash Community Advisory Panel, i.e. the Zcash community. So this isn't a situation where I personally get to decide things. Anything that relates to enforcing the aspects of the trademark agreement or consensus mechanisms or those sorts of things, they go to the board. And anybody in the Zcash community can stand for election to that board. And in fact, there will be 2 seats open for election later this year. If you want to, Josh, you can join the Zcash Foundation board.
So, okay? But it is true that the Zcash...
But let me just reiterate. It's not true to say that it's me.
Okay, so who signs off on it?
As the chief executive
you sign
of that organization, I sign off on it.
Who drives the conversation?
At the direction of the board.
So, okay, so
and
understandably...
during the run-up to NU5, we had a meeting and we decided whether or not we wanted to sign off on it, and we decided to sign off on it.
Fair enough. I readily admit I don't understand the governance of the Zcash Foundation and how much the board influences those decisions.
Well, we're paying very close attention on matters like that.
What's that?
We pay very close attention on anything.
So you pay close attention. So, like, who made the decision that NU5 was okay?
We all discussed it.
The board.
Yeah.
The board. Okay. So the board at the Zcash Foundation, a U.S.-based legal entity, makes the decision that it's going to sign off on a network upgrade. And Zuko, on behalf of ECC, makes...
Technically, it's also the board of Bootstrap that has the ability to...
But it's an advisory.
Things.
The Bootstrap board is an advisory board, correct? Right? So they could fire you, or they could...
Right. It's the same structure with probably more or less all boards.
Okay. So...
But go on. Your
The
point
board here
was
and the board
Zcash
here makes the
Foundation
decision,
and
signs-
Bootstrap
signs-
If
are
your
two
point is
entities.
that it's up to ECC and the Zcash Foundation what constitutes the Zcash protocol, yes, you are correct.
Okay.
I'm just pointing out that.
You just want your name off of it, and you want to
Well,
say
no,
it's legal.
I just want to be clear that you're personifying it in
Yeah.
a way that's not appropriate.
The point is, it's not the community.
The community has input into the makeup of the Zcash Foundation board.
But some board members have been appointed and not elected, right?
They've been appointed for either continuity purposes or because we believed that their skill set was essential. And I think that decision was borne out by what's happened recently.
But going back to-
the majority of the board is appointed with the input of the Zcash Community Advisory Panel. And it doesn't matter how many times you keep banging on about that, that's still the truth, and it's a fact.
So the Zcash Advisory Panel is an entity, a collection of people that the Zcash Foundation manages.
That's
right?
correct.
You set the policy for it, whatever, it's non-binding. For ZIP 1014, it was a combination of the advisory panel and forum polls, because that's what you decided you wanted to do, or Josh did, or Josh and the board did, or whatever. But to Jason's point, it's like, how do you more decentralize the decision-making of what goes into the protocol? What is the
One thing I would, again, one point I would make, you just said that the Zcap is managed by the Zcash Foundation. And you raised this point maybe about a year ago, I guess. And at the time, we offered to share stewardship of Zcap with ECC.
Yeah, we
And
declined.
you guys turned us down.
But
So
why?
I want to be clear that our goal as an organization is to make sure that we take into account the views of the Zcash community. Now, we would be abdicating our responsibility as the people that they have, advisorily elected or who are employed to do specific jobs if we didn't exercise our good judgment.
So we didn't join because it's centralization. We didn't join because you created it, you managed the questions, all that kind of stuff. And you said, yeah, maybe we can open this up and we can have, but it's further centralization as ECC and ZF making all the decisions in choosing the people and how they're chosen and how they're polled and all this kind of stuff, not necessarily reflecting a broader ecosystem.
Well, there's an easy solution to this, right? You create a board or a committee or a council, and it has ECC, ZF, it has elected members from the community, it has major stakeholders, and they collectively decide.
That's very consistent with the suggestion to invite more participation on the organization of Zcap. I mean, that's a path towards a gradual improvement.
So would you guys commit to doing that?
We're not going to commit to anything without, that's
Not right now.
That's,
Would you
that's,
commit
that's
to
launched off
having
the cuff
discussions?
on a stage.
But the point is,
what we
you're
have
controlling
committed
it.
to,
You're controlling
what
it.
we have committed to is respecting the will of the Zcash community, and we're the only organization that receives a dev fund that actually does so, that actually goes and actively solicits the feedback of the Zcash community. And I think it's disappointing that people are trying to use that fact to try and call into question our motivation.
Yeah, so truth-telling, that's also not true. ECC does that as well. It's just more, it's not through a formal Zcap. So give us that credit, right? But it's still a concentrated power of determining what questions to ask, what things to put in front of the community. Why not make it more like the Ethereum community?
That I can remember, any time somebody has asked us to put a question in front of Zcap, we have done so. And the only time that I can recall that happening is when Jason proposed an amendment to ZIP 1014.
Because we don't get involved with the Zcap. It's not that ECC has agreed with
You can't
polling.
complain that you're not involved with Zcap because you're not involved with Zcap.
We've never
if you want to be
complained.
involved with Zcap, you can be involved. We are happy to share stewardship of ECC.
We have not
we
once
laid out
complained.
a very, very clear protocol for that to happen.
We have not once complained that we're not
So
involved
if
with
you
Zcap.
if you want to get involved, you're more than welcome. The invitation is open. It still stands.
Let's talk about what Zcap is. Zcap is it was created to be the advisor of the Zcash Foundation, right? Would you agree with that? It advises
I wasn't there when it was created. I'd say that the way it's used now is we use it as a means of assessing the will of the Zcash community and getting advisory input.
Sure. So
Now you know, again, I'd be careful about characterizing it in a way that it isn't actually.
I want to give my characterization of it, which is that I don't think there's a mechanism by which the board of the Zcash Foundation can like abdicate our decision-making a power to something informal, like you know, loosely organized and somewhat anonymous, the way that Zcap works. So that is, I think, kind of a thing out of its nature. I consider Zcap to be extremely influential to the point of soft binding, if I'm making up like a term. I think that if there were a clear viewpoint expressed through the Zcap and the Zcash Foundation, rejected that, we would have to make the description, decision-making explanation in public. I don't think our legitimacy, would survive that. So I consider it not formally binding, but about as strong, especially when it gives like, when it's like 51, 49%, then it's tough to interpret the tea leaves. But when it demonstrates clear community consensus, I think it's extremely influential.
And that's sort of my point. Like, and this is what I was saying about the Zcash Foundation, governance being concentrated with the Zcash Foundation, right? Like, it makes sense for the advisory panel to advise the Zcash Foundation on what their strategic priorities should be, like ZSAs and programmability. I don't know that the Zcash Foundation's advisory panel should be determining ZCG elections and what the dev fund's going to be and protocol changes. I think that should go to the community. Like, that should be
distinct.
So you say go to the community.
Well, yeah.
Let's set aside the constant sniping at Zcap, and let's focus on what do we use as an alternative.
I'm not saying that you can't use Zcap. What I'm saying is that Zcap has become incredibly important to Zcash governance, and that's a credit to both of you. Andrew, you created it. Jack, you expanded it. But it's outgrown the Zcash Foundation, and I think that it needs to move to a more decentralized model.
Absolutely open to hearing ideas for that. You've seen us seeking to expand it, seeking to make it easier for removing these strict requirements about who can join and who can not join. You've seen us offering to share stewardship of it. Absolutely open to hearing that. This idea that Zcap is only for the foundation, I think is not appropriate. I think it is an very imperfect, but right now the most reliable way of assessing the consensus of the Zcash community. Like democracy, it's the worst possible solution apart from all the others.
Yeah, I want to use this time to say coin holders matter, and we definitely need like some sort of coin holder voting mechanism. The fact that we don't have one, I think that's long overdue.
So I seem to recall a year ago asking whether ECC and or Bootstrap was going to incorporate coin holder voting as an advisory input to their decision-making and board makeup. Any progress on that?
We do only have 2 minutes left, so.
We've not made any progress on coin holder voting in last year.
So I think it's all about priorities. We believe that right now Zcap is good enough. And I hear that people don't like the fact that it's not perfect or that it doesn't incorporate whatever mechanisms, but at the end of the day, it's what we have right now. And I think if, for example, the community believes that it's really, really important to supplement Zcap with other means of consensus assessment, then it's for the community to do that. If the community comes up with good ideas and we can act on those ideas, then we may well do so.
We're going to have to go to last thoughts, but I'd love it to hear any further suggestions on decentralization, including decentralizing Zcap, but otherwise too. Haven't heard much from Zuko in the past few minutes.
All right, I have 45 seconds. I'll try to use 15. I think the community has an opportunity because the dev fund is sunsetting itself. You got to make changes or let it expire. Pretty much everybody wants to make changes. I think the community has an opportunity to increase decentralization of Zcash. I hope this whole thing was just enlightening or instructive about that. I think we can and should increase decentralization.
Still have 10 seconds. I feel like the music's a little premature. Do you have like 8 seconds of closing thoughts, Ian?
Increase access to the block reward, get more people owning Zec and using it, get more people having a stake, so therefore more people have a skin in the game to create proposals on how we can decentralize things like Zcap. We need more than people that are really represented by 2 organizations on this stage. We need more groups in the community to make those proposals other than just us.
All right. That's out of time. We should wrap this up. Thank you for the engaging panel. Thank you all.
Thank you.